Welcome to Humans of AI. I'm Laura Weaver. Picture this. You're 21 years old. You just started your first real job at Israel's Ministry of Finance. They sit you down in a corner office. No one else has access. For the next 3 years, you'll work on restructuring the entire Social Security system. Healthcare, old age benefits, child benefits. If word leaks, careers end.
We were working on restructuring the Israeli social security system. And people were terrified, in the US it's called the third rails of politics, because they were like, well, if this leaks, we're all screwed. So let's put this, 21-year-old to start working on this, because if this fails, we're going to throw this guy under the bus, basically.
This is Matan-Paul Shetrit. Today, he leads product design at Writer, building and scaling agent-based AI for enterprise. But that corner office, that's where he learned something most Silicon Valley product leaders miss entirely. Before the Ministry of Finance, before product management, Matan worked in wine. His family had been growing grapes in Israel since the 19th century. At 18, needing a job before military service, he started offering samples in supermarkets. Over time, his role grew, working directly with wineries, arranging tastings for wine critics and magazines. That's where he learned his first lesson about how systems really work.
You take a person to a 3 Michelin star restaurant and you wine and dine them, literally, and they know that if they write a bad review, they're not coming next time. So there's these really interesting terminology that's being used in the industry by industry experts to indicate that your product is shit without calling it shit.
An entire industry speaking in code, everyone playing the game. If you don't know how to read between the lines, you miss it completely.
It was a very interesting experience, and also showed me the power of marketing and the word when it comes to getting your product out there and making sure people want it and love it, and how language matters.
From wine, Matan pivoted hard. Economics and game theory at university. He planned on academia. Then, a 6-month university strike forced him to find work. He landed at the Ministry of Finance. The corner office followed.
Which, on one hand, is terrifying if you think that you're letting any 21, 22-year-old do anything like that. But I guess it kind of makes sense from a political point of view.
Inside that office, Matan assembled what Israel calls a blue ribbon committee. Central bank officials, national unions, doctors' associations, hospital administrators. Every meeting was theater.
When you go to this kind of committee, you don't leave it to chance. We kind of knew, I would say 90 to 95% of what we want to achieve from it. And then a lot of it was theater and getting the right players in the room. That was okay, what does it look like to, negotiate between the central bank and the national unions and the doctors' association, the nurses, the hospices, the hospitals, because this has immense impact on a full social safety net.
He was applying game theory and economics not to abstract models, but to the actual mechanics of how societies function. Incentive structures, behavior patterns, downstream impacts.
That was the first time that I started really thinking, without knowing what to call it, the value of being a product person. Back then the product was policy, but it was still product. And it's okay, you sit, you design this, you think through the incentive structures, how people behave, what's the impact.
But the experience taught him something else, something that separates his approach from the typical Silicon Valley playbook.
Even if you think a system is broken, there's a method to that madness of the system. There's a reason things were designed the way they were. It might not be relevant. It might be that you can do it better. But the assumption, which I see a lot in the Valley and in general, is we know best. And I think this is why something that I really love about what we do at Writer, which is we might be closer to the technology, but you didn't stumble into being a Global 2000 or a Fortune 500 by chance. Obviously, you know what you're doing in your industry. Let's bring that knowledge together with the tech capabilities to build something, almost like something magical, something new, something unique.
That humility, that understanding that established systems have logic, even when that logic isn't immediately visible, became foundational. Because now Matan works with those Fortune 500 companies, helping them transform how work happens with AI. And he's learned something surprising about who's actually ready for that transformation. Here's the conventional wisdom. Enterprise companies, especially in highly regulated industries like healthcare and financial services, are slow to adopt new technology. They're risk averse, they're stuck in their ways, they're dinosaurs waiting to be disrupted. Matan believed that too, until he started working with them.
Surprising to me, I have to say, I would never have guessed this before I joined Writer. If you look at our customers that we focus on the regulated side of the industries, whether it's healthcare, financial services, and such, it's not even pleasantly surprised, I was mind blown away by the appetite for change these companies have. There's always this like joke of like enterprise are these dying dinosaurs. Yeah, that's not true. I mean, we sit with them on a daily basis and they understand that they have to change. They want to change and they're pushing for change.
These aren't companies being dragged into the future. They're pushing for it. The leaders at these organizations understand that marginal changes to their processes have massive implications. They know what's at stake.
We sit with these people that have worked in these organizations for a while and they're like, yeah, we need to do things differently. We are the domain expert and I'm telling you that the way I do this has to change. And you're like, well, that's really, really inspiring. And also shows a maturity and confidence in their position as a company that they can do that. And the value of the brand, the value of the product, the value of the people in the organization.
But wanting change and successfully implementing it are two different things. And this is where Matan sees AI companies, including startups in Silicon Valley, making the same mistakes that cloud providers made 20 years ago.
You know, we've seen this before with cloud, for example. For too long, the hyperscalers would tell, historically, they would say, hey, we have this cloud offering, it's great, blah, blah, blah. Here you go. And people at the enterprise will be like, what the hell do I do with this now? How do I actually implement this? How do I roll this out? And I think change management is really, really key component. Now, 20 years later, I don't think there's the questions on cloud. If you don't handhold them through this transformation, you're going to fail.
The technology isn't the product. The transformation is the product. Because here's what makes AI different from previous technology shifts. It evolves while you're implementing it.
I think in the AI space, this is to the extreme because of the pace the industry is moving. Your assumptions and the decisions you've made could be out of date very, very quickly. And it's hard because if you're, let's say, a customer of any of the AI shops, especially if it's an enterprise, you might sign up for a service that does X, but very quickly it evolves to do something slightly different or completely different because the technology has unlocked a completely new set of capabilities.
For organizations built on stability and predictability, this creates tension, and it raises a question. If the technology keeps changing, how do you help people change with it? Matan points to a surprising barrier. It's not that people resist change, it's that expertise can become a cage.
If I came to you 15, 12, whatever years ago and told you, listen, throw away your BlackBerry, I'm going to give you a mobile device that's like a touchscreen, you'd be like, what the hell? Like, I don't want that. I want a keyboard. I think there's a little bit of that component, which is when you are in an industry, in a business, and you understand it so well, your mind is so geared to that. So it's hard to sometimes step out of the trenches.
When you've spent years mastering a system, when you understand every nuance of how your industry works, reimagining it from scratch is almost impossible. You're too close to it. This is where the real work begins. Not just implementing technology, but helping people step outside their own expertise long enough to see what's possible.
this is where I think there's room for a lot of the work we're doing, which is like, what does it mean if we needed to reimagine the way work happens in an enterprise? And sometimes we fail, and a lot of times we succeed. And when we succeed, it's exciting. When we fail, it's also exciting because we learn a lot. But I think that to me is the piece that's like the most invigorating and exciting at the job.
Reimagining how work happens. That phrase might sound abstract, but Matan's been thinking about it in concrete terms. Specifically, he's been thinking about what happens when the fundamental constraint on your work disappears entirely.
Building enterprise-grade AI shouldn't be complicated. It should just work the right way. At Writer.com, we don't do everything. We do one thing. We build enterprise AI that unites business and IT. Business teams? Build your own AI agents. No code required. IT teams? Manage just one platform, not a plethora of point solutions. Writer.com creates AI tools that are safe, scalable, and smarter every time you use them. That's why Accenture, Qualcomm, Vanguard, and hundreds more aren't just doing enterprise AI the right way. They're doing it the Writer way. Book your demo at writer.com/demo.
For years, Matan's work as a product manager was defined by scarcity, limited budgets, limited time, limited engineering resources. Every decision was an allocation problem. You have X. You need to deliver Y. Figure it out.
Historically, as a PM, you always say no, like I have capacity limits. It's kind of like also ties very nicely to that game theory, econ background. It's like you have a budget, the budget is time or engineering resources or whatever, and you allocate things against the budget.
But Matan started thinking, what happens in a world of abundance? What happens when that constraint disappears? The question wasn't theoretical. He'd seen it before at a company called Flexport, a global freight forwarder bringing technology to an industry that had hit a wall.
If you look at the freight forwarding market, one of the reasons there isn't a single player that has more than, let's say, 3 to 4% of the volume of traffic of trade is because they physically cannot run the business. Like these are companies of hundreds of thousands of employees, and they physically cannot manage the headcount at scale.
The bottleneck wasn't demand, it was headcount. The sheer number of humans required to operate at scale made growth impossible. Now, combine that reality with something else. The marginal cost of deploying an AI agent is approaching zero, and these agents aren't deterministic machines.
This idea that agents are machines is actually wrong. Not as in like, I'm not saying they're human, but more that they misbehave, they have sparks of creativity, sparks of randomness. So I like to call them like a junior intern almost, at least at this point.
Junior interns. You can deploy thousands of them. They cost almost nothing. The work itself is no longer the constraint. So what is?
So I went from a human that my constraint was like capacity of like the work I can do to a new constraint, which is my capacity to manage these agents. Now, I think the reality of it is depending on the role and depending on the context and depending on the day, you will be either a manager of humans, a manager of agents, or a manager of hybrid teams. So the reality is every one of us is going to become a manager.
Every one of us is going to become a manager. Think about what that means, not just for the individual roles, but for entire organizations.
And this is, to me, in some ways more scary than the quote-unquote AGI discussion, because I'm not scared for my daughter, for example. She will grow in the world where people manage agents. I think, but between someone who's a toddler to me that is becoming way too old, there's a skills gap where it's like, what does it mean for me as an employee to manage? I've never managed. I don't know what it means to manage. Managing people will be essentially, maybe not different than managing agent. And that is a skills gap that we need to think about as an industry.
A skills gap. The current workforce isn't trained to manage. Most people have never managed, but now everyone needs to learn, not eventually, but immediately. And on an organizational level, the implications are even more dramatic.
So let's say I'm 1,000-person company and I'm killing it. I have great growth. The business is healthy. Now you start deploying agents. So let's say 10,000. If you agree with what we just said, you're no longer a 1,000-person company. You just overnight became an 11,000 employee company. That's not the same beast. And any startup can tell you that growing from like 50 to 100 to 500 to 1,000, like all of your processes break.
Scaling from 1,000 to 11,000 employees overnight isn't a productivity boost, it's an organizational crisis. Every management structure, every approval process, every communication channel designed for 1,000 people suddenly needs to handle 11,000.
I think where the real bottleneck on AI to provide the promise that it can and should is not about how we build agents, it's how we scale them, how we do this in a way that the CIO or CISO doesn't wake up with cold sweat at night and can really manage this fleet of what I would call organic and synthetic agents, like humans and machines, at scale for their organization. And that's like a completely different skill set on the individual and on the org.
The industry talks constantly about building agents, frameworks, tools, capabilities, but building them isn't the bottleneck. Scaling them responsibly is. Managing a fleet of organic and synthetic agents, humans and machines working together, that's the actual problem to solve. And it starts with something I didn't fully understand until recently. I've been working with Writer almost daily for 3 years now. The platform has evolved, my usage has evolved, but it wasn't until I started talking to other users that I realized something surprising. Most people don't use AI iteratively. They treat it like a delivery device. Ask a question, get an answer. Done. But I work with it more like an editor works with a writer. I'll get an output and think, okay, this is interesting, but let me give you some feedback. Let's refine this. Can you analyze what worked in this session so I can build on it next time? I realized I do this instinctively because of my editorial background. It's how I've always worked. But for most people, that's not intuitive at all. When I mentioned this to Matan, his response was personal.
My wife's a great writer and she has a writing background and a marketing background, and I'm not. I had to spend a lot of time and effort to be able to write an email, let alone an essay in English or in Hebrew for that matter. Growing up, I was diagnosed with dyslexia, and like writing was not something that came natural to me and required a lot of effort and blood, sweat, and a lot of tears.
Matan and his wife have an ongoing debate about AI and writing. She comes from an editorial background. He doesn't. Their perspectives are different, but Matan has a theory.
I remember growing up, when I took my, let's say, AP math, I couldn't use a calculator. Or when I wrote an essay, I couldn't use a spell checker. Now, obviously, generative AI is, to some extent, it depends on your perspective, it's a bigger leap than that. But I actually think AI is teaching us great skill sets that, or will force us to learn skill sets that we haven't yet, which is editorial and critical thinking. Because if you take everything it says is like the gospel, then there's a problem, because these machines by definition make mistakes. The point here is I think it requires you to be a critical thinker who are essentially turning into editors rather than writers. And yes, that is a skill set. It's a skill set that no one is learning today.
Editors rather than writers. It's a skill set, but there's another problem. The interface itself.
There's nothing scarier than an empty text box or an empty white page. And I think, if you look at companies like Notion, where you saw them blowing up as a product is when they built a Notion template store, not just like exploded.
Notion exploded when they added templates. Because most people don't want to start from scratch. They want scaffolding, structure, a starting point.
Most people don't want to interact with the terminal. They want to point and click. They want something very visual, interactive. They want to abstract complexity. And then if you want more complexity, you can go.
Right now, AI interfaces work like computer terminals in the 1980s. You have to know the right commands. You have to speak the right language. That's backward. The interface should adapt to the user, not the other way around. And for enterprise organizations, this means something specific. The AI needs to understand the organization's intrinsic knowledge, what Matan calls the orchestration or judgment graph.
How do we distill that knowledge, that intrinsic knowledge your organization has from day zero as you build your business? That is the real value, whether it's the people, the processes, and the hierarchies, the orchestration or judgment graph, and then bring that in so the AI tailors itself for that need. So then you don't need to be like a Pulitzer Prize winning writer to get this machine to do what you need, because it has all this context and understanding of how you think, how the organization thinks, how the organization works.
This isn't about teaching everyone to prompt better. It's about encoding organizational intelligence so the AI already knows how the company thinks, how decisions get made, what matters. Because if you have to prompt your way through every interaction, you failed. This idea that organizations need a framework for managing hybrid teams of humans and agents is something Writer has been developing with customers. We call it the Agentic Compact, principles for how humans and AI agents work together, make decisions, and share accountability. It addresses the questions Matan's been grappling with. Who supervises whom? When does an agent need permission versus autonomy? How do you scale judgment, not just tasks? But even with better interfaces, even with organizational knowledge embedded, there's still a fundamental question. How do you know if it's working? The AI industry has become obsessed with observability. Logs, metrics, dashboards showing error rates, latency, time to first token. It's the same approach that worked for APIs and cloud infrastructure. Track what's happening, monitor performance, and alert when something breaks. But Matan argues that observability isn't enough.
Observability tells you what happened, and what we should care about is supervision, which tells you, did the thing that happened, should it have happened, and if so, why? Because I think that in itself gives you a lot of information on iteration, refinement of the behavior of the agent over time.
Supervision versus observability. It's not just about knowing what your agents did. It's about knowing whether they should have done it. And that requires something most organizations don't have, a baseline for what good actually looks like.
Everyone is talking about, is the agent good? Was this agentic system good? I don't know what good means. And the problem is no one in the industry knows what good. It's not even what good looks like, because I think it's kind of like, I can tell you if I get an output if it's good. But to do that in scale, that's different.
No one knows what good means. That sounds like a philosophical problem, but it's actually a measurement problem. And it reveals something crucial about how we think about AI versus how we think about humans. Matan was sitting with a financial institution, demoing an internal support agent.
We showed them a demo, and the demo, let's say, had 80% accuracy rate. And they're like, why is it only 80? This was like an internal use case for their certified support agents or whatever. And I was like, can you tell me what's your accuracy rate or hallucination of your human agents? They're like, no. It's like, okay, let's play a game. Let's call 10 times to your customer support center and ask the same questions and see what we get. What do you think you guys will get? And then they're like, I think it would be less than 80%.
Think about that. They were complaining about 80% accuracy from an AI system while acknowledging their human agents probably perform at 60 or 70%. We hold AI to a deterministic standard, perfect or broken, while accepting the inherent randomness and mistakes of human performance. We don't even measure human accuracy in most cases.
The issue here is we're comparing agents to computers in a deterministic manner rather than agents to humans in their randomness and mistakes that they make. But the problem is we don't measure a lot of those things. So it's really hard to set a benchmark.
Without a human baseline, how do you set realistic expectations? How do you know if 80% is failure or breakthrough? The double standard isn't just unfair, it makes it nearly impossible to evaluate value. But even if we solve the measurement problem, there's another question. When AI makes a mistake, who's accountable? Matan was driving in San Francisco. His car has a self-driving component, 2 hands on the wheel. He's at a red light, front of the lane.
There was this really weirdly positioned turn. We had a red light, a car stopped. I was the front of the lane, but there was the green light of the turn was positioned in an angle that the car thought it was my green light. So it almost ran a red light. I paid attention, I braked.
He caught it. He stopped the car. Because at the end of the day, he is responsible.
Whatever output the AI brings out, it still comes out under your name. And I think we are a bit at this free-for-all stage that everyone is generating slop. But then that would have to change, because guess what? If you publish garbage, it doesn't mean if you're a marketer or a strategy dog or whatever, then that's the quality of what you do.
The fear of AI slop is real. Content generated without thought, published without review, flooding the internet with mediocrity. But Matan's point is simple. The tool isn't responsible. The user is.
To me, it's a tool. And if the tool is misused, it's not the tool's fault, it's the user's fault. Now, that doesn't mean the tool doesn't need like guardrails, the regulation, the safety in place. But if you're now generating garbage and sending it to your CEO and then they fire you because it was garbage, that's not the CEO. Like, you had an opportunity to review the stuff. That's on you as the person who stands behind the product that you bring out there. So I don't think AI should or would or does reduce the personal accountability and responsibility we as humans have for the stuff we say and the stuff we publish.
AI doesn't reduce accountability. It can't. Whatever comes out under your name, under your organization's name, that's on you. Which brings us to the final question. What do enterprise leaders most need to understand about this transformation? If Matan could sit down with 100 enterprise leaders tomorrow and get them to internalize one insight, it would be this.
The understanding that this is not a magic, like a silver bullet, but also the patience and willingness to partner. And I think that's true for both sides, for AI companies, but also for these companies together. We're navigating through a new terrain, and that requires really pushing each other and testing each other to the limit with what can and cannot be done.
Patience and partnership, not just between vendors and clients, but a shared understanding that no one has this figured out yet. Everyone is navigating new terrain together. But there's another thing leaders need to understand. The demos they see on social media, the viral videos of AI doing incredible things, that's not how businesses actually work.
If you look at what's happening like in social media around AI, like most of the demos you see there are horseshit. And they don't scale in the enterprise use case. Now, that is a highly curated, and you don't run your business on highly curated stuff. Your business is about the exceptions that happen through that. It's not the happy path. It's how you go back from the exceptions to the happy path.
Businesses don't run on happy paths. They run on handling exceptions. The customer with the unusual request, the process that breaks at 2 a.m., the edge case that no one anticipated. That's where the real work happens. That's where AI has to prove itself. Matan-Paul Shetrit's journey from marketing wine to restructuring Social Security to building enterprise AI reveals a consistent understanding. Systems are complex, change is hard, and success comes from humility, from respecting why things work the way they do, even as you reimagine them. The transformation ahead isn't just about deploying agents. It's about fundamentally rethinking the constraint that governs work. It's about training an entire workforce to manage when most have never managed before. It's about measuring what we've never measured, supervising what we've never supervised, and holding ourselves accountable in entirely new ways. And it's about understanding that the real bottleneck isn't building the technology, it's scaling it responsibly, managing that fleet of humans and machines working together, navigating the exceptions, not just celebrating the happy paths. The organizations that get this right won't be the ones with the most sophisticated AI. They'll be the ones who understand that transformation is the product, that supervision matters more than observability, and that humans and machines working together is an organizational challenge, not just a technical one. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you to Matan-Paul Shetrit for sharing his story. And if this episode made you think differently about AI accountability, please share it. Text it to a friend or pass it along to a colleague. Subscribe now to Humans of AI wherever you're listening. I'm Alora Weaver, and this was Humans of AI.